Some stories begin with silence and a sound of something falling. That morning, in the marble halls of a billionaire's mansion, a small silver ring rolled across the floor. The same ring he thought he'd lost forever, along with the woman he once loved. "You dropped this, sir," the maid said softly, holding it out with both hands. He looked at her, not at the ring, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir behind his quiet, broken heart. Because sometimes it's not what we lose that changes us. It's who helps us find it again. The morning sun poured through tall glass windows, gliding over marble floors that reflected everything but warmth. The city outside was alive, but inside the Rayan estate, time moved slowly, trapped between perfection and loneliness. Ethan Ryan, the man who owned the house and half the skyline it overlooked, sat at the edge of his bed, staring at his hand. His ring finger was bare. It had been for months now. He rubbed it unconsciously, the way you might trace a scar. His wedding ring, a simple band of platinum, had vanished one night after an argument he still couldn't forget. His wife, Amelia, had left the house the next morning and never came back. No lawyers, no goodbye. Just silence, and that silence was louder than any fight they'd ever had. The mansion was spotless, not because Ethan cared, but because the people he hired did. Every corner smelled of lemon polish and newness, even though everything inside felt old. Among those who worked quietly behind the scenes was a woman named Sarah. She was new, hired through an agency just weeks ago. A widow, they said. A woman of few words but quiet grace. She cleaned with care, like each object had a story. That morning, she moved through the study, dusting, folding, arranging. Her hands were rough from years of work, but her movements were soft, almost reverent. She noticed the way the house resisted her, as if it wasn't used to gentleness. From the corner of her eye, she watched Ethan pass by the corridor. He looked like a man who lived surrounded by people yet belonged nowhere. His suit perfect, his eyes distant. Later that day, while polishing the old bookshelf in the library, Sarah found something on the floor, half hidden under the rug, where the morning light just barely reached. A glint of silver. She knelt, brushed away the dust, and held it up. A ring. Not just any ring. A man's wedding band, simple but expensive, worn on the inside with faint scratches. She turned it over and read the faint engraving inside. "All my tomorrows." For a moment, she froze. She didn't know whose it was, but she could feel it. This ring had been loved once. She wiped it gently with her apron and stepped into the hallway. Ethan was standing by the window, looking out at nothing in particular. His phone was in his hand, his posture straight but tired. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned, his face unreadable. "You dropped this, sir." But she held out the ring. For a second, he didn't move. His eyes fell on the small band resting in her palm, and the world seemed to stop. The color drained from his face. His throat tightened. Where did you find this?" His voice cracked softly. "In the library," Sarah said, "under the rug." He stepped closer, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. When his fingers touched the metal, something inside him broke. A dam he'd been holding for months. He didn't say thank you. He just stood there, staring at it like it had pulled a ghost from the past. Sarah could see the ache in his eyes. Not the arrogance of a billionaire, but the loneliness of a man who'd lost something he didn't know how to live without. She hesitated, then quietly said, "It must mean a lot." He looked up. "It did. It still does." She nodded. "Some things don't stop meaning just because they're gone." He said nothing. But something shifted, like a small crack of light in a dark room. That night, Ethan sat in his study again. The ring lay on the desk beside a half-empty glass of scotch. He kept turning it over, tracing the engraving with his thumb. "All my tomorrows." He remembered the day Amelia gave it to him. She had been laughing, wind in her hair, eyes brighter than sunlight. "You don't have to promise forever," she'd said. "Just promise tomorrow." He'd promised. And then life had drowned them both in deadlines, boardrooms, and pride. He slipped the ring onto his finger again. It felt strange, like wearing an old heartbeat. In the morning, he found Sarah in the garden, trimming the overgrown roses. "Thank you," he said simply. She looked up surprised. "For what?" "For finding it. For returning it." She smiled faintly. "It was never lost, sir. Just waiting to be seen again." He didn't know why, but those words stayed with him all day. Maybe because they weren't about the ring. Maybe because they were about him. That evening, the mansion felt less empty. Not because anything had changed, but because someone inside it had noticed something worth saving. Sarah continued her quiet work, and Ethan watched her from a distance, curious, unsettled, oddly drawn to her calm presence. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. But somehow, just her being there made the silence less cruel. Sometimes she'd hum softly while cleaning, and though the notes were almost lost in the air, Ethan found himself listening, as if her voice was gently sweeping dust from his own heart. And somewhere between the quiet steps of the maid and the stillness of a man trying to remember who he was before wealth took everything human out of him, something fragile began to breathe again. A beginning that neither of them recognized yet, but the kind of beginning that would one day ask the question, when love walks out the door, can kindness lead it back? Because sometimes what you drop isn't just an object, it's a part of your heart. And sometimes the right soul will pick it up for you. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion began to breathe differently. Ethan still spent most of his hours in his office. His empire spread across screens, numbers flashing like distant stars. But something in his routine had changed. He began to notice things. The faint smell of jasmine that lingered after Sarah cleaned the halls. The soft hum of her humming, never a full song, just small, wandering notes. The way she opened the curtains just enough for the morning to touch the room without blinding it. It was as if she knew the house better than he did, and perhaps she did, because while Ethan was surrounded by luxury, Sarah saw the dust that gathered where love had once lived. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the city. Thunder growled above the glass roof, and the rain struck hard against the windows. Like the sky was trying to wash something away. Ethan was in the study, staring at his reflection in the glass when Sarah entered quietly, holding a tray. "Coffee, sir." He turned. "Thank you." She placed it down carefully, but as she turned to leave, he said, "Sarah, wait." She stopped, unsure. He looked at her, really looked, and asked, "Do you ever get used to the silence here?" She gave a soft smile. "Silence isn't always empty, sir. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to listen." He didn't know what to say. Those words, they hit deeper than he expected. The storm worsened that evening. Lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a fuse blew, plunging part of the house into darkness. Sarah went to fetch candles from the storage room. She moved through the dark halls with steady hands, used to the shadows. Ethan followed her without realizing why. Maybe because he didn't want to be alone in the dark anymore. He found her in the kitchen, lighting a candle. The flame flickered across her face. Gentle, calm, steady. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. Sarah shook her head. "I've lived through darker nights than this." Something in her tone made him pause. "You mean?" She looked down. "My husband passed away 3 years ago. There was a time when the house was dark for months. No storm, just quiet." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I learned that grief doesn't leave. It just changes shape." She blew out the match and stood there in the glow of the candlelight. Her eyes calm but heavy with memory. And Ethan, who'd spent months avoiding his own, suddenly felt seen. Later that night, they sat in the library. The rain softened outside, tapping gently on the glass. Sarah cleaned the bookshelves while Ethan read. But there was comfort in the silence now, a shared understanding that didn't need words. At one point, she found a photo frame tucked behind a stack of files. She picked it up carefully. It was a picture of Ethan and Amelia, younger, happier, standing by the ocean. Their fingers intertwined, the same ring glinting in the sun. Sarah hesitated. "This is your wife." Ethan's gaze lifted from his book. He nodded slowly. "It was." "She looks kind," Sarah said softly. "She was. Until I wasn't." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I built everything people told me to build. The business, the house, the legacy. But I forgot the one thing she needed." Sarah looked at him waiting. He swallowed. Time. For a while they both sat quietly, the candle between them burning low. Then Sarah said, "Maybe love isn't lost, sir. Maybe it's just waiting for you to forgive yourself." Ethan met her eyes. In that single look, something broke and something healed. Because forgiveness, that was the one thing he had never given himself. The next morning, the mansion felt softer. Light poured through the windows like it had found permission to enter again. Ethan started small. He joined the staff for breakfast, something he'd never done before. Sarah was surprised to see him there, sitting at the long kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, smiling awkwardly. "Good morning," he said, his tone unsure but kind. The cook nearly dropped her ladle. The gardener nodded politely. Sarah tried not to laugh. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," Ethan said, "but maybe I should." And for the first time in years, laughter, small and unpolished, echoed through the house. Later that week, Ethan asked Sarah for a favor. "I need to visit the old beach house," he said, "the one on the cliffs. Amelia loved it there. I haven't been back since she left." Sarah hesitated. "You want me to come?" He nodded. "Just to keep things in order. It's a mess." But what he didn't say was that he couldn't face that place alone. The drive to the coast was quiet. The road curved through golden fields, the sky heavy with late afternoon clouds. When they arrived, the sea breeze greeted them. Wild, salt-scented, alive. The house stood weathered but beautiful, overlooking the waves. The air inside smelled of old paint and memory. Sarah opened the windows, letting the wind rush in. Curtains fluttered like white wings. Ethan stood in the center of the room, staring at a photograph still hanging on the wall. Amelia standing barefoot in the sand, smiling at him through time. "I don't know why she left," he said quietly. "She just said she needed to find peace. I thought she'd come back." Sarah placed a hand over her heart. "Maybe she wanted you to find yours first." He turned toward her. "Do you really believe peace comes back?" She nodded. "When you stop chasing what's gone and start listening to what's still here." The waves crashed louder outside, as if agreeing. That evening, as the sun sank into the sea, Ethan walked down to the shore. The wind whipped his hair, the water brushed his shoes. He took off his ring, looked at it, then at the horizon. For the first time, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Sarah watched from a distance, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because sometimes healing isn't about words, it's about presence. And that night, as the stars began to rise, Ethan realized something profound. The ring he'd lost wasn't the only thing he'd dropped. He'd dropped himself somewhere along the way. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to pick up the pieces. Because sometimes, life doesn't give you back what you've lost. It gives you someone who teaches you how to live without it. The beach house stayed with Ethan long after they returned to the city. He started spending less time in the boardroom and more in the garden. Less in silence, more in small conversations that didn't feel rehearsed. He'd find reasons to cross paths with Sarah, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to ask about the roses, and each time something in his voice softened, Sarah noticed. Not as a woman hoping to be seen, but as someone quietly proud to see another human beginning to breathe again. One morning, she found Ethan sitting in the garden with a notebook open beside him. "Writing something?" she asked, setting down the watering can. He smiled faintly. "Trying to. It's been years since I wrote anything that wasn't a contract." "What is it?" He looked at the page, embarrassed. Letters. To Amelia. Not to send, just to speak. Sarah nodded. Sometimes the heart listens better on paper. He chuckled softly. You always say the kind of things people don't know they need to hear. Her smile was shy. Maybe that's because I've needed to hear them myself once. They began talking more often after that, not about money or work or loss, but about the small things life forgets to notice. Sarah told him about her late husband, how he used to fix old radios just to hear music from a fading world. Ethan told her about the first company he built, how he slept on a floor, chasing a dream that one day became too heavy to carry. Somewhere in those stories, laughter began to return, quiet, genuine, unpolished, the kind that doesn't echo but stays. Then one evening, something changed. Sarah was leaving when Ethan called after her. Sarah, wait. As she turned, the night air cool around them. He hesitated, holding something in his hand. A small silver bracelet. This was Amelia's, he said. I found it at the beach house. I don't know why I'm giving it to you. Maybe because it shouldn't stay locked in a drawer anymore. Sarah froze. Sir, I can't. He interrupted gently. It's not a gift. It's a reminder that memories don't have to be prisons. Her eyes softened. She took the bracelet carefully, feeling its weight not heavy, but full of quiet meaning. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. No, Sarah. Thank you for helping me remember how to be human again. But healing, like tides, never moves in a straight line. A few days later, an article broke online, photos of Ethan with his maid, headlines twisting kindness into scandal. Billionaire's affair with domestic worker. Ethan Ryan's mysterious companion raises questions. The press loved a story. They didn't care about truth. The mansion phone wouldn't stop ringing. Business partners called, voices full of judgment. When Sarah came to work that morning, the guards wouldn't let her in. I was told to tell you you're dismissed, one said awkwardly. She froze. Be Mr. Ryan? He looked away. By his assistant. I'm sorry, ma'am. Her hands trembled, but she nodded silently and walked away, her eyes glistening not from anger, but from quiet disappointment. She had known this peace was fragile. Still, she hadn't expected it to break this way. Inside, Ethan was furious, not at Sarah, but at the world that couldn't see compassion without assuming something unclean. He fired his PR manager that afternoon. He called Sarah's number again and again, but she didn't answer. Her absence filled the house like a shadow. The silence, the one she had softened, came roaring back. He walked past the rose garden she tended. The flowers had begun to wilt. He stared at them and whispered, I did it again. I let good slip away. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ring on his finger and the empty chair across from him, realizing he was tired of being misunderstood, tired of being afraid to care. The next morning, he found her. Not through the agency, not through the phone, but by following the scent of jasmine, the one that reminded him of peace. She lived in a small apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were clean but bare, the kind of place built on dignity, not luxury. When she opened the door, surprise washed over her face. Sir. He cut her off softly. Ethan, please, just Ethan. For a long moment, they said nothing. The sound of the street below filled the silence. I didn't fire you, he finally said. That was someone else's decision. But it doesn't matter. I should have protected you. The Sarah shook her head gently. You don't have to explain, Ethan. I understand how the world works. No, he said firmly, his voice trembling with sincerity. That's the problem. You shouldn't have to. He took a step closer. Do you know what I realized, Sarah? I've spent years hiding behind money because it was easier than facing people. Easier than feeling. But you looked at me like a person when I didn't even know how anymore. Her eyes softened. And you reminded me that kindness still exists, even in the places where people forget to look. He smiled faintly. Then maybe we saved each other. She didn't reply, But the silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was full, like the air before rain. He asked her to come back, not as a maid, but as a caretaker for the gardens, the spaces she'd already filled with light. She hesitated. "People will talk again. Let them," he said quietly. "For once, I'd rather live the truth than their version of it." Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw not the billionaire the world saw, but a man learning to live again. She nodded. "All right, Ethan, but only if I get to choose the flowers this time." He smiled. "Deal." The mansion changed after that. The roses bloomed again. The laughter of the staff returned. Sarah moved through the halls not as someone unseen, but as someone whose presence carried warmth. And Ethan, he carried himself differently now. No longer haunted, but quietly grateful. He still wore the ring, but not as a chain, as a promise. To never forget what love truly meant, not possession, but connection. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan walked into the garden and found Sarah standing among the flowers, her hair catching the golden light. He said quietly, "You were right, you know." She turned. "About what?" He smiled softly. Silence isn't empty. It was just waiting for someone to listen. And she laughed, that quiet, pure sound that filled the evening air like forgiveness itself. Because love doesn't always return in the same form it left. Sometimes it comes back as peace, as friendship, as the courage to begin again. Months passed. The mansion no longer felt like a monument. It felt alive. Windows stayed open longer. Flowers bloomed brighter. And the man who once walked through marble halls like a ghost now laughed, planted, and sometimes even sang softly when he thought no one could hear. But change, true change, always tests you before it rewards you. One morning, a letter arrived. Old-fashioned, sealed with a wax stamp. Ethan sat in the garden when he opened it. The sunlight danced through the leaves, and Sarah was nearby, trimming roses. He unfolded the paper slowly. His breath caught. It was from Amelia. The handwriting, gentle, steady, was unmistakable. He hadn't seen it in years. His fingers trembled as he began to read. "Ethan, by the time you read this, I'll have learned how to live without anger. I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't love myself while staying. You built an empire, Ethan, but you forgot how to rest inside your own heart. If you found peace now, real peace, then that's all I ever wanted for you. Keep the ring. Not as a memory of me, but as a reminder that love doesn't end when life changes. It just takes a different form. Be kind to whoever helped you find yourself again. She's already done what I could not." Hey. The words blurred as his eyes filled. The sea breeze seemed to pass through the page itself. Sarah noticed his stillness. She put down her shears and approached quietly. "Bad news." He shook his head, voice low. "No, just closure." She waited. He handed her the letter. "She forgave me." Sarah read the words slowly. When she looked up, her eyes glistened. "Then maybe now, you can forgive yourself." He exhaled, long and heavy, like releasing a lifetime. Maybe that's what she wanted. A days later, Ethan announced something that stunned everyone. He was stepping down as CEO. "I've spent years chasing numbers," he told the board, "but I've forgotten the people they represent. It's time for something different." The media erupted. Investors panicked, but Ethan didn't care. For once, his decisions weren't about control. They were about peace. He turned his focus to something new, a foundation for single mothers and widows, named the Tomorrow Project. When asked about the name, he simply said, "Because everyone deserves one." Sarah helped run it quietly, never asking for credit. She arranged shelters, food programs, and work opportunities. Ethan handled the logistics, she handled the hearts. Together, they built something Amelia would have been proud of. One evening, they returned to the beach house, the same place where his healing began. The sun was melting into the sea, the sky bathed in gold and rose. Sarah stood by the water, barefoot, wind tugging gently at her scarf. Ethan walked beside her, holding a small wooden box. Inside was his wedding ring. He smiled softly. "I think it's time." Sarah looked at him, puzzled. "For what?" He opened the box and took out the ring. "For letting go, not of her, but of the pain." He stepped into the surf. The waves curled around his feet. For a moment, he stared at the horizon. Then he threw the ring gently into the sea. It caught the sunlight once like a small star, before disappearing into the waves. Sarah watched quietly, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and peace. When he turned back, she said softly, "How do you feel?" "Lighter," he whispered. For the first time in years, they walked along the shore as night fell, the sky deepening into indigo. "Do you ever miss him?" Ethan asked. "My husband." Sarah smiled faintly. "Every day. But missing doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me that love was real once, and that's enough." Ethan nodded. "Maybe that's what love really is. Not forever, but real." They stopped, watching the moon rise over the water. He looked at her, the woman who had entered his house as a maid and became the reason it became a home again. And in a quiet voice that trembled with truth, he said, "Sarah, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's love or peace, or just something sacred I can't name. But whatever it is, it feels like the first honest thing I've felt in years." Her eyes softened. "Then don't name it. Just let it be." He smiled, and for the first time it reached all the way to his eyes. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The foundation grew. Ethan's name was still known, but now it carried a different weight. Not power, but kindness. And every morning, Sarah still came to the mansion, carrying the same calm presence that had changed everything. They didn't need declarations or labels or noise. They just existed, side by side, quietly, meaningfully. One evening, while watching the sunset from the balcony, Ethan said, "You know, the day you handed me that ring, I thought you were just returning something lost." The Sarah turned to him, smiling softly. "And what do you think now?" He looked out toward the horizon. "I think you handed me back my life." The camera of our imagination pulls away, the light fading, the sea glowing, the house standing still against the wind. And the voice of the narrator, gentle as dusk, speaks one last time, because sometimes the person who bends to pick up what you've dropped isn't just returning a thing. They're returning your heart. And sometimes, love doesn't arrive dressed in passion. It arrives in grace and patience, in a quiet voice saying, "You dropped this?" "Sir," because love doesn't always arrive perfect. It arrives brave,